I'm always fascinated by people that create this partnership and create together. So two big questions. One is, I guess, the origin story and how you two came together.
I think it's a fabulous story, actually. So,
It
I
really
mean,
is.
it was
It's like a
very,
Disney fairy tale, but in work relations versus princesses and princes.
and a little newer fairy tale because
Yeah.
because I feel like the princesses aren't waiting to be saved. They kind of do a little bit of their saving for themselves. So, what got me into the work that I do with women is because primarily we do work with women, though we have fabulous guys along the way in the journey, but was very much a being thrust into a caregiving role for my father after he had a debilitating stroke and realizing how important it was to connect the wellness aspect of our lives in terms of everything else. And it just kind of snowballed from there. So there is that aspect of wanting to make sure that everyone feels that sense of empowerment with however they choose to move their bodies. And then, of course, we've got Shelby. Shelby, tell us a little bit about your story.
So mine's similar to where I had a kind of that epiphany. And I was in the mortgage business. I was very good at my job. I will not make any bones about it. I was very good at it, but I hated it. It was soul sucking work. Like I despised every day I woke up and I just was filled with dread and anxiety. And every single day I'm like, I'm so done. And it took a really hard turn, especially during the pandemic, where my mental health went in the toilet on top of an already stressful job that I wasn't happy in. I knew I couldn't do this. I didn't want to look back in 10, 20, 30 years and still be dealing with all this. And I had became a runner. I had became a mom in that time frame. And so much of the stress and anxiety I was having, I knew wasn't healthy. And running gave me, I think, the confidence and the outlet to work through a lot of that. And I decided, 2020 in the middle of pandemic is a great time to just make a career change. And I pulled the plug and was like, nope, I'm done. I gave my notice and I started just leading with my love for running.
How did you decide, okay, we're going to work together and we've decided to do it in this way? What was that
Ah,
thought
see, this
process?
Oh, how
I
long's this podcast?
I love these kind of questions because thinking of Shelby, when you talked about in the middle of a pandemic is kind of when you decided to do this big shift. And I think that it is a lot of times in lives we make these big shifts because you're kind of forced to. There's no other option. I mean, there's always another option, right? But the option of being miserable or not allowing ourselves to see the opportunities that lay before us is always a little scary, but also very exciting. And I think the pandemic brought that out for a lot of folks because we kind of had time to be quiet and see, like, this isn't working for me. And how do I make my life work for me?
And a lot of businesses were born during the pandemic because everybody had a lot of not necessarily free time, but different time. And I do think in general, the pandemic made everybody kind of reevaluate their life a little bit. And I know for me, like, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be my own boss, but to actually do it, there always usually is that, like, kind of portion that's like, all right, I'm crazy enough. Let's go ahead.
But let's also be honest, there's a lot of scary stuff that I'm sure we're going to get to as well. But basically, we met through an app where both of us went to work as independent contractors, and they housed the beauty of running that we were allowed to do or able to do through technology and a virtual platform. And they closed their doors or they sunsetted the app due to just, things that changed in their lives as well. And we had a very short turnaround to kind of grieve the process of this community that we had literally become like our Saturday crew, our Sunday crew, our long run friends. And we didn't know exactly what we'd do. But one thing that we connected about was that we knew we were going to serve the community. One way or another, we were going to figure out how to keep this community together. So we basically just started texting and it's like, hey, let's see what we can do about keeping this together. And while neither of us are coders and we probably would never be able to create an app on our own accord, we did know that we had the microphone and we had a way to record. So we decided to launch Time for Brunch and continue serving our community.
And an important caveat of the story is Christina and I, up until this point, had never met in person. We had talked on the phone. We had seen each other like for video and through that, and we had a great connection. But at that point, again, we live 3 hours away, basically. I don't do that type of thing, and nor do I recommend it for the masses. But for us, we had this connection from the get-go that even while we were working for the app, we always loved working together.
Yes, there's no doubt. We had a very special connection earlier on. And I'm going to recommend it for the masses. If you have something, if you have something sparkly and magical and it's calling to you, you need to leave because that doesn't happen every single time. And I mean, Shelby, I've mentioned to you, I've shared the microphone with countless other folks at this point because I had another podcast as well. And there wasn't that magical sparkliness that her and I have together. So I feel very wholeheartedly that you have to take that leap if you feel that that's calling to you.
But this is no, I think that's a really great point because I know that there's people listening who either they're thinking about starting a business, they don't want to do it on their own, or they're thinking about a podcast, or they're thinking about creating a community. They don't want to do it on their own. They want support. They don't know who they would go for, or maybe there's not someone they know in person that they would choose to work with. You know, we have really close friends, but sometimes you can't really imagine working with them all the time. So I think that this is really nice to explore in ways you might not expect. Did you have any sort of growing pains in the beginning? Like, what was it like being virtual, both of you, being 3 hours apart, starting this new partnership?
This is where we should have asked you if there was a specific rating you're looking for on this podcast. Do we need to keep it clean?
There's no, this is
Okay.
uncensored.
Okay, Shelby, it looked like you were ready for your answer, so I'll let you go first.
I honestly don't think in the beginning we really had many growing pains. I think we were both so excited and so focused on getting off the ground, keeping our community together. And I think I can speak with both of us as we jumped both feet in. Like she's action based, and it's one of the things I love the most about her.
But yes, there wasn't growing pains at first. And I don't know that I would call it growing pains now. There's evolution as you continue to work toward the goals that you may have set, or also as maybe the goals change a bit.
One of the topical discussions you had that looking back, you think, you know what, it really wasn't a big deal for me to hold my view on this. Like, you know, something that it could have been the colors, it could have been the messaging, it could have been, I don't know, a guest you decided
Oh
to
my
have.
gosh,
Like,
I
what
still
would be
feel this
something?
way. And I would literally say this to anyone right this very second. Quit banging your head against the wall about this shit that doesn't matter. Like nobody's going to care about the name. Nobody's going to care about the color or the branding. You can rebrand down the road. If that's what's
Yeah.
holding you back, if right now you're spending 48 hours a week trying to figure out what your name's going to be and what the brand colors are going to be, who cares? Like literally don't get in your way that with those little tiny details because it will never be perfect and you will evolve as a business. So it will have to change at some point.
We like everything tied up in a nice, pretty bow, like to present to people. But I think that's one thing we definitely had to work on both together and individually of like, this is good. Let's put it out there because we can always evolve and adapt, which I think definitely for me is hard because I like checking it off and being done with it. I don't necessarily like to keep revisiting things.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if maybe if perfectionism is more easily cured with a partner.
Maybe. I think what it is that there's an accountability with a partner.
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to, one, compromise where maybe if you're stuck on your own, you're not as willing to compromise because you want what you want. And two, it is also like you can always change your own deadline and you could do it with a partner, but you're not as likely to do so.
Yeah, for sure. It's a balancing act, like no matter if you're by yourself or with somebody else, but there is that extra layer of I can't keep spinning my wheels because if I do, it's never gonna do. It's never going to happen. It's never going to go out there.
I think what we've also learned is to lean into our community, let them, I mean, we're serving them, right? So if we come up against a decision that can't be made or that we're having difficulty on ourselves, let the good of the community actually come up with the decision. So that's been a big one for us, is making sure that they actually become our partners along the journey as well.
What do you wish each of you had learned about entrepreneurship and running a business sooner and running a community? What do you think would have been helpful that you would share now with someone listening who's like day one starting?
Is it like having a kid? You can learn all the things, but you're never going to be prepared enough. I mean, I know, Shelby, I'm not a mom, so I'm usually hesitant saying that, but I feel like I did do a lot of learning. I saved a lot of money. I could tell you that the learning wasn't enough and the saving wasn't enough. And it is one of the situations where you will never feel fully prepared, is what I think I would say.
I think that's a good way to put it. I always go back to like my philosophy is you have to parent the child you have, not the child you thought you had. And I think that's been a big learning curve for me is being able to pivot the vision and pivot what I want to do or what we want to do, and being okay that that's going to look different than what I dreamed about so long ago.
Yeah, I love this what you just said about the parent, the child you have, not the one you wish you had or the one you thought you would have, because I think the business you walk in with an idea and it evolves because it's dynamic, especially if you're working with customers in a community and the world changes and the environment changes and your business baby is not going to stay a baby, right? Like it's going to evolve. So that's where we kind of go into this next question, the biggie. What is happening in your business now? Where are you both going with it?
We're ready to serve more people, is what it comes down to. Like, yeah, we are ready to be able to serve folks the way that they're asking to be served. And when we first went into it, again, being running coaches primarily, that was our initial. We always wanted to welcome everyone, for the record. So runners, walkers, movers, and shakers was our go-to. It still is. But I think now for me, the movers and shakers are a little different in that I definitely am ready to serve people that are looking to move and shake in many ways of their lives. So personal development or career development. So really focusing on serving the folks that are looking for more of like a holistic approach to that next level, or that level up of their lives.
Throughout the journey, throughout everything, I pride myself. I am a mom. And while I am more than a mom, I have lots of commas and asterisks and other bullet points. I am a mom's mom. And I love everything we've built and everything that like Christine just said, but taking it and making it applicable for moms.
What were some of the turning points that led you to realize that you each wanted to talk to the people in your space where you're at, where how you've evolved? Like what were the moments or conversations or the feedback you got from your community or even in your own individual lives where this started to be more apparent that you wanted to go in this new direction?
I think you nailed it. It was in the conversation of the community we serve. So when we are able to speak to our athletes and our clients and hearing what they're needing, what they're turning to us for, what directions they need the most assistance with. I also think that there's a little bit of, you will always produce the the curriculum, is what I tend to call it, that folks that you kind of most align with as well.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And I think, like Christine had said, with conversations with our different clients that we currently have, things spark you at different time. I think that's part of the entrepreneurial spirit that you hear a phrase or you hear something that somebody needs and it creates this fire in you. And you might not realize it that moment or in the weeks to come, but sometimes the best entrepreneur portions come from those random isms. And you start thinking, you start creating, you start dreaming on the different portions. And before you know it, it's a fire that you're like, yeah, this this calls to me. And going back to what we said earlier about how I know I personally needed to kind of learn that things evolve so differently than what you do envision.
Yeah, this is so important. I hope that people are listening because when you get that feedback from your community and your audience, and when you feel that inner resistance, like it's time to evolve, you really do have to honor it. I felt this too. You probably have both seen, I think when we first met, I was pivoting out of fitness and I was getting a lot more into like how Christine, it sounds like you're doing a lot more into the personal development space, the mental health. That was the female empowerment, really
Mhm.
important to me. And it was because people were asking for it, but also because I felt kind of like the box was too small for me at that
Yeah,
point. I
absolutely.
don't know if you feel that way too.
Yeah, I think so. And I feel like, again, our stories align very much because the whole premise of feeling good naked goes with changing the inner part of how we think and how we act and behave and the words that we use. It's very rarely about how we physically look. So, of course, it would make sense that there would be an evolution of your brand where you would be like, I'm hearing you. I'm serving you already. Let me just go ahead and put the label that's attached to it because I think that's what it basically is. So, and there's so much excitement in that, and that's why I think we will always I mean, I can't 100% speak for you, Shelby, but I think there's always gonna be that angle of making sure that we do continue to advocate for physical wellness because that is really a magical portion of this recipe.
Mhm.
Do you feel, and I don't know how specific you can get into this, but what do you feel will be the ways that you're going to be serving your audiences, each of you, now? Is it going to be, for example, the same show, but you take on different guests and episodes? Is it going to be you're offering different coaching services? Is it going to be the community has different verticals? Insofar as you feel comfortable, what are you thinking about? I know probably when this goes live, it will look different.
Well, right, because we'll be parenting the baby that we've got at that point versus the baby that we think. But as of right now, everything you just said is absolutely what we're looking at doing. So yes, bringing in more guests. I would say that in 2023, while we had some really spectacular guests, they were very running focused for the most part. And in 2024, we're looking at bringing it more, again, holistically, the stuff that we preach and that we talk about with our clients, but maybe we haven't externally pushed out into the world quite as much. So we're very excited about that aspect of it. And yes, seeing different verticals. We're really excited to see that there'll be opportunities of bringing in other coaches and having more of a collective or a collaboration with other coaches as well, because I think, again, something that we can all say here in this space specifically is that we very much all feel that women are not our competition, but really just an extended part of our community. So when we collaborate with other women coaches, even if it's the exact same sandbox, it's always going to look better for the audience.
And that's a great way to put it. And kind of what you said, like when this actually does air, that there might be differences in how everything's applied. But I think we both are approaching this as a way of let's speak to what we feel driven to, what we feel that is needed, and supporting each other. I mean, even as we're bouncing different ideas that might not include each other, we're constantly asking like opinion, feedback from each other because that's an important aspect of whether you have an official partner or just somebody who you do bounce off those ideas for. It's entrepreneurship's very hard by yourself. Even if you do solely quote unquote own your business, it's it's almost impossible to not have anybody to have feedback, but it's equally important to find somebody that you can have that trusted feedback. And I know, like, for Christine, like, she'll tell me if something's horrible. She'll be like, she won't actually say that, but she'll be like, I think you could do a little bit more searching. And she says it very nicely, but I know no matter what, she's rooting for me and I'm rooting for her.
Yeah, I've got actually a question for you on that. The both of you can take if you want, but what are some of the things that you've seen because you've done a few years now together? What are some of the things that you see are not necessary to tackle on your own, or that maybe you'll do differently when you go in your respective ways, even if you're collaborating together? Like, what are the things that you're taking with you from this experience so far?
I love that question. I think that this is a question where as an entrepreneur, we have the hardest time letting go of things because it is our baby. And then we throw ourselves into a hamster wheel. We're not able to be as productive or be as creative or really serve our community because we are trying to do it all. So for me, I know for a fact that I will be outsourcing different aspects of the production of the things that we do because it is so incredibly time consuming. So I think that it's looking at maximizing time and seeing how I can buy back time that is truly our most beautiful resource and our most limited resource that we could ever possess.
I think, again, because I'm going through it in real time, there's still a lot that is being figured out. I think the hardest thing for me is, and we talked about this actually before we had even come on, is I'm having to relearn what my process is, because before Christine, I had never worked with anybody. I'd always been solo. So it's one of those to where I would think in the we aspect, I would think in how messaging was and everything. And now just doing it solo for the mom portion, it's a different thought process that I'm having to relearn for myself.
It's like I know it's a lot more pronounced when you're coming from a partnership, but I feel like in general, even for solopreneurs, it's learning the different language as you pivot, as you go into a different industry. It can be really hard because you had a process and a way of working. And even like you said, Christine, like learning to delegate. I mean, that's something that is really different from if you've been doing most of it on your own or together. It's difficult to figure out what does that look like, and you recognize that probably there will be some mistakes along the way. I know I've had a lot of those.
Just a little. If anybody who's listening can honestly say they've just had just a few mistakes and they are light years ahead of where I am personally and probably will always be. I don't think that you can be an entrepreneur and not fail greatly every day. And that's what's beautiful about being an entrepreneur is that you have to be willing to have that kind of audacity and also the courage to pick yourself back up, to put yourself back on that place moving forward again, because it does take a lot of inner pep talk. Again, going back to that inner conversation that you have to do.
And that mental space of trying to pick yourself up, because again, we went from an app that closed down to picking up the bootstraps, creating this and going through another evolution. I think everybody can have a very rosy picture of the entrepreneurial life, but very rarely, like we were just talking about comedians that we had followed and singers that we had followed, all the work that goes in the back end that you don't see. You don't see the 15 missteps or the skipping this or skipping that and the reworking in the background. You just see the finished product. And as much as all of us entrepreneurs want everybody to think that we have every answer, everything together, if you've been on your own or with a partnership, you realize very quickly that's not there. There's a lot on the back end, and having that mental bandwidth to keep going is a superpower in its own.
Yeah, this is a completely random reference, but I just saw a little clip of Lady Gaga talking about how you basically can do anything, but you have to persevere and get through the doubts. And it made me think about how these people, celebrities, they have the shows and it's amazing and they're doing these interviews, but behind that is all this admin work that we hate, right? Like the rewriting the songs, the practicing step by step, the moments in between when you're not doing anything, but you're thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part is the really slow mind grinding moments where you're behind the scenes.
That is part of being an entrepreneur is that you can pretty much count on double, if not triple the amount of work that you would have for others. And that can be scary. And it's also incredibly magical because what does drive us to sit here and produce and is the community that we're serving. So at no point have I felt that it was all for naught. There was one project that I probably did that was probably not that like, I probably could have spent a little less time on that one. I'm talking about those fitness cards, Coach
I
Shelby.
see, and I love those freaking
were-
fitness
They were
cards.
beautiful, but good God almighty, I spent like hours on like, is that shadow the right shadow? And does anybody even
Listen,
care about that shadow?
Graphic creation has been my biggest time suck. Like, I tinker way too much with graphics
Mhm.
that most people, like, if I put side by side, like, what I started an hour ago to what I ended with 3 hours ago, no one would care about the differences that I made. But for me, it was stuck in my craw, and I needed it to be just so. And I mean, yeah, graphics are a time suck for me. That is my Achilles heel of the entrepreneur life. Like, I can write copy. That I can do. And I love my graphics. But that darn little bubble should be just a smidge smaller. And
Yeah.
if it's not going to be aesthetically pleasing. And that's all I'm going to focus on.
Yeah. There's no
Don't
doubt on
don't
that.
don't be me. Don't be me when you grow up. Just leave the dot where it's at.
Oh, I know it. I know it. I love this. I love that you both referenced a couple things here. One is like, of course, the projects that you don't need to sink so much time into, but you end up doing it. I think we all have stories of those projects where did I really need to spend that much time? And then you create it, and maybe it's not as well received as something that you spent very little time on, and that's super frustrating.
Isn't that always the kicker?
Yeah. We talked about that as well a little bit earlier today, where it's basically a process of starting to also separate that the things that we pour ourselves into may not be well received and still being okay that it's not a personal affront. It's not a rejection of ourselves, even though it feels that way because we've poured ourselves into it so much. So I think that that is something definitely that as an entrepreneur, you have to keep coming back to is reminding yourself that it has nothing to do with your value. It's just possibly not the right time for that product or the algorithm, Instagram, or looking at you with reels. But all of those things that definitely come up. There's no doubt about it. But it's exciting at the same time. So I think
It's the same thing like with the evolution. Like, again, a year ago wasn't the time for us to lean into what we're both leaning into now. That's not where we were a year ago. That's not where we were 2 years ago, and it's the same for entrepreneurship as a whole. If you don't allow your business and your ideas and creativity to evolve, eventually it's no better than just working for a 9 to 5 and clocking in. Like, what are you really getting? It becomes a job that you don't wanna do, to where, again, we all become entrepreneurs more or less to be able to follow a passion or a calling. So, follow it. Don't just stay because that's what's comfortable. If we wanted to do that, we'd go back to a normal 9 to 5.
Oh, I
yeah.
love that. I'm going to close it out from there because I love that statement. I think that that's the overall message of this whole show. The idea that yes, it's hard, yes, it's difficult, but it's always worth doing if this is what you want. Thank you for that message, Shelby. Thank you, Christine, for the many messages. Thank you both for really sharing this evolution and what it's like to work in a partnership, because that's something that we haven't explored so much on the show, and I know people really do wonder about. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and for the amazing community you've built. Can you just share where people can find you when this goes live in 2024?
Time for Brunch Podcast.
Amazing. I'll include, as always, in the show notes for everyone. And thank you again for coming on the show. This has been a really great, I love starting the mornings this way. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.